Here it is, folks. This is the hardest video I've probably made because as a film fan, as someone who loves Italian films, Italian neorealism, Criterion collection, all that stuff, I've been putting off Umberto D for a long, long time because I knew what it was about. I knew it was about an old man and his dog trying to survive. You know, it says in a post-war economic boom, they're trying to make ends meet. To provide some context as to why this is so difficult for me, when I was in second, third grade, I had a dog. We found this dog from someone that worked with the coal mines. I don't exactly know the whole story. Absolutely beautiful animal. Just this border collie German shepherd. This great dog. Very close to the dog that I had all the way into my mid-20s. So you talk about elementary school, all the way through your young adult life. And I have never seen a film that quite understands the relationship between a dog lover and a dog, and especially someone who truly is just attached to that animal the way that this film does. And it's not a sentimental mess. It's not sugar and goopy gobbly. It's a tremendously made film. Martin Scorsese actually talked about it as being the climax of the Italian neorealism movement in a TCM, Turner Classic Movies intro, in the early 2000s. And I'm kind of kicking myself because, there was a time when, you think about, I'm a pet lover. I don't have pets now. There's a lot of reasons I don't, but I love animals. And I have such an admiration for animals. I see them as much as I can in the West when I go on road trips. I love seeing pets and I love animals. And I'm kicking myself because for a long time I had this idea in my head that I can't watch and I won't watch films that aren't in English because how will I be able to look at the images and read? And that's just a bad way of looking at movies. If you have that idea of, in your head that that's how you have to watch movies, you're missing out. You really are. And I say that as someone who never thought he would get into foreign films the way he has. So I put this off for a long time, and it took about 4 days to get through it. I had to pause it a lot because there was just so many, you watch a film like this, and if you're an animal lover, it can just trigger thoughts you haven't had in a long time, things that haven't come up, and it's kind of a difficult therapy, really, to get through this, especially toward the end. But what's it about? Okay, Umberto D. Here you got a guy, an old guy. Roger Ebert described him as upright, neat, exact, with the cut of his clothes that show that he was once respectable, and he's not now. He was a civil servant. Times have long passed since that. We don't know everything that's happened in his life that's caused that. That's caused that level of poverty. You think about a movie like Fargo with not Steve Buscemi, but William Macy, when we don't really know why he needs the money so badly. Sort of like that. You're a little bit in the dark on that. It actually makes it a little bit more interesting. But all he has now really is his dog. At the beginning we see him kind of in a strike or a protest or something. You can kind of get a feel of that if you watch the film. It is. I don't know that it's as political as some of the films might be in this genre because the film doesn't necessarily give you a clear indication of how you should feel about that, right? It's not preachy or didactic or any of that. It doesn't. It just shows you that this is a part of this person's life, this economic reality. And when you see this, you see it. Here's a guy that has, at one point he's considering boarding his dog, and he shows these people this stuff in a suitcase. He's like, to help pay. If we're gonna board this dog, then here's some stuff in a suitcase. I'll just barter. And I will say that as I have aged, I'm 39. As I've gotten older, I less and less like escapist cinema. I like this kind of stuff better. And there's nothing wrong with escapist cinema at all. I guess maybe that's what some of the silly horror movie slashers I tend to watch around Halloween are like, but in general, the stuff that moves me is stuff like this. You know, these classics from Italian neorealism. Just some guy who is trying to live in an apartment or a house or whatever it is. You know, I don't know the exact arrangement, and everything's kind of working against him. The woman that rents or whatever that the room he only has a room. He just wants his room. She uses it, like she rents it out. It seems like sometimes to couples so that they can. That's the impression I got, and you know, there's some remodeling done at extraordinary discomfort for a lot of folks there. There's also living in that same building. There's a young like maid or servant or however you want to look at that. And she's pregnant. She's trying to hold the idea that she's pregnant from, you know, the woman because of social status and blah, blah, blah. And she didn't know who the father is. And in some ways, she is just as aimless or directionless as where Umberto is many years later. You know, as an old man, she's a young woman, but neither one of them really have a plan exactly. Like she's just trying to work there long enough before she gets kicked out for being obviously pregnant. It's just bitter reality. It's kind of awful. You know, De Sica, like, it would be one thing if the story was just told the way it was, which is compelling and moving and powerful and so emotionally resonant, but I think there's a little something extra that he gets just out of how he films it. You know, I talk all the time on this channel about great filmmakers using visual storytelling and how important that is. The architecture, especially, all over the place. There are a couple of examples that really just come up in my head. One character at one point is leaving. He's below a big window, and you kind of look up at the window and you see the other character, and it's like ominous and imposing, and there shouldn't be a whole lot to it. But De Sica understood that relationship of space. You know, I know that sounds simple, but some directors can and can't do it. John Ford was great at space. You know, I was watching The Searchers the other day. You've got all these cowboys just riding along, and then Monument Valley's back there, arches or whatever it is, and you're feeling that emptiness and that loneliness with them. And another example in this film, there's a character who sees a big hole in the wall. And it has to do with these renovations I was talking about. And the way the camera follows that and the hole and what's on the other side, and like, you know, it creates almost like a mirror effect or something. There are all these instances in the film where all of the thematic elements, or the plot elements, if you can say this thing even has a plot, all of those are amplified by the visual aspects, the cinematography. It's so brilliant. And it makes you stop and think in a way, I guess, like, you know, I talk about Yasujiro Ozu a lot on this channel. He's my favorite director. Yasujiro Ozu was famous for using pillow shots, these moments where you're able to kind of stop and reflect on something big that happened with a character, or a change, or a dramatic moment. And this film, like, it's not exactly a drama. Like, it's more of a collection of events, a slice of life, because it doesn't have that neat Shakespearean arc. You know, it really doesn't. The end is appropriate and great, but like I said, it's a slice of life. You know, it's a piece of reality, and difficult economic reality. I talked about the architecture and how important that is. De Sica in this film gets a lot out of just the most random objects that you wouldn't think of, like being in a bed with your dog in this film is sometimes all you have as a human. And I think that's just so true. Like, this guy gets back to his room after he's trying to pay his bills and his debts, and he's considering begging on the streets, and there's commentary on that, and then he goes to his bed, and he's just trying to relax with his dog, and the dog's on the bed, and it's just like, if you've ever had a pet, you know that feeling. and that's especially true. This isn't just a film for dog lovers. I mean, it's, cat lovers. You know how it is. You get a cat on the bed and they sleep there and make you more comfortable and inviting. There is in one part of this film, there's an acorn. An acorn. I think that's what it was. Something from a tree. It's probably an acorn. And that had more importance than any object in the film. This is a film that is fiercely anti-materialistic, in my opinion. Materials don't matter. Whether or not you had a nice car at one point, or maybe you did have a nice house or a nice carpet or whatever it is that you had that's fancy, at some point it really just does not matter. What matters in this film is whether or not you're playing fetch with your dog. There's a true beauty and simplicity, and I just appreciate the conviction the film had on that front. The dog, by the way, Flag. Cute. Adorable dog. He does tricks. There's a really great scene where the dog does this and has a hat, and that's a meaningful part, and the dog is used so well for just like, so I was thinking when I was driving in my van and trying to figure out how I was going to articulate why this film's great, and I was thinking about the kid. That's a chaplain silent, and the kid is that you have this tramp, this loner. Great silent film, Charlie Chaplin, and it's a similar situation because he's just like he only has this kid that he meets, and then they grow this fond relationship. But I was thinking about the kid, and I was like, there's something extra to Umberto D, because the dog, you're limited in what you can see on that end of the story, right? When you do get to see the dog's opinions, some of that's in the cinematography, the close-ups, especially toward a train scene, you get to understand what the dog's probably thinking. It's so limited that it just, when it's there, it really adds a lot, as opposed to like if it's a kid, you kind of get a little bit more of the kid's perspective, right? And that's great too, but the limitations of that, right, of that part of the story, make those moments when the dog is really expressive hit a lot harder. Now, the guy, the main character here, he might remind you, if you've kind of listened to the plot or know the plot or seen the film, you may have heard of Akiru. Okay, this film kept coming up a lot for me, and I also have a DVD. I have a DVD of both. I have a DVD of Umberto D. I got this for a few bucks. Akiru. And it didn't matter at all that I watched this on DVD. Held up really well, but Akiru was like an old bureaucrat who was trying to sort of make amends, and it's a little bit different of a story, but it's an old guy facing life crises, right? In his case, a little bit more health related, although this character has health problems, and you'll see that. But I love how the casting went down in this, because to my understanding, this is just basically, and if any of you know this a little better than me, and I'm misspeaking, let me know, but I think this is just like non-professional actors. I do know that the main character was a professor. So Carlo Battisti, excuse me, he was like this 70-year-old professor that De Sica just met one day and was like, this is the guy, And Scorsese and some others have talked about how there's just a certain little something you get from a non-professional actor playing this role, that realism that I was talking about. Again, it's not escapist. Like, it's not, it instructs, it delights, and it challenges. That's what the film does. So let me Roger Ebert, okay? I love this part from Roger Ebert. All right, this is a good set. This is 2 sentences from him I really liked. He said in his review, of course, Roger Ebert had a great review of Umberto D. Sorrowful dignity is exactly what Battisti embodies for Umberto. He's observant, understanding, sympathetic. He doesn't rail against the injustice of the world. Pause. This film is full of injustice. Economic, like the housing thing, like you could do a whole doctoral thesis on housing as a human right and how you feel about that here. That's just like a big part of it. Huge part of it. Injustices about what happened to the animals, like you get to see like a shelter situation, and that part's going to mess with your head, right? Anyway, injustice, big part of this film. Anyway, to go back to Ebert. Ebert said, he, Umberto, doesn't rail against the injustice of the world, but is simply determined to defend the corner he occupies with his dog. And I love that phrase, defend the corner he occupies with his dog. Because that's really what pet ownership tends to be. And I was thinking, gosh, this was the perfect time to watch this film. And this is going to sound like a really roundabout way of discussing this film or comparison, but I'm working right now. I'm thinking about putting an air conditioner on my van. And the reason I want to do that is I want to be able to travel a little easier. Maybe I'll get it done. Just like I want to be able to be less materialistic and more in the world and of the earth, and more experience bound and less materialistic. And I want to be out places I love. Now, the reason I bring that up when talking about this is I think this film, for folks my age and especially for younger folks that maybe would write off something like this because it's a 1950s film, it's black and white, it's form, whatever. This is like a perfect film for right now, because a lot of folks are they're converting vans, they're never going to buy a house or whatever. I have a house. There's a lot to that, but we didn't buy a house that was this great value because it's just have you seen the housing market, right? A lot of folks don't expect, to be blunt and to be honest and to have this realistic conversation with you. A lot of folks just don't expect things to get better. And so there's some part of that this film taps into, living life a little bit more, I don't want to improvised or free or without restriction, and some of that purposeful and some of that economically based, I guess. Because this isn't a film about an old guy who's looking back at this beautiful house and his children, and it's just some guy, right? And he's just surviving with his dog. And I think a lot of Gen Z and I think a lot of younger people are feeling that. They've got their dog, they've got their cat, they've got I said, a lot of them are living in vans or whatever, or small apartments, and they just don't have those dreams of the future. And so I think that this film is going to hit extra hard for folks, right? In addition to the fact that it's just already a great film if you love animals. And let me be clear. No film I have ever seen made me appreciate the dog I had more than this one. Oh, what a wonderful film. Tell me what you think of it. These are some of my thoughts. If you like the content today, click like and subscribe if you love Criterion Collection and classic films too. Cody in the Cinema.